On Monday, February 13th, 2017, at around 1:30 p.m., two best friends, Liberty German and Abigail Williams, went for a hike on the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. Shortly after 2 p.m., a man approached the girls. He then ordered them down the hill to their eventual death. Their bodies were found by searchers the following day on Tuesday, February 14th, at around noon, on a stretch of private property just 50 feet from Deer Creek and within a half a mile from the bridge. The identity of the suspect, now known as Bridge Guy, remains unknown. Police have revealed very little information outside of a short snippet from a video recorded by Liberty German of Bridge Guy approaching the girls, walking the Monon High Bridge, and a voice clip taken from the same video where the suspect is heard saying, "Guys, down the hill." This suspect or suspects must be apprehended. One of the best ways to solve this case is to raise awareness through public discussion. There is hope the suspect's identity will be revealed and law enforcement will have their day in bringing justice to the families. If you know this suspect, please contact law enforcement immediately by the telephone number or email address provided in the description of this episode. Never rationalize a tip as not being related. Someone out there knows this man, and that person could be you. And we're back again, guys. This is another episode of the JS Podcast. I am your host, Juras, and yeah, pretty much welcome to episode 6 of the JS Podcast. And today I'm continuing further into the Delphi Murders Investigation. This is part 3 of my in-depth look in the case where Abigail Williams and Liberty German were murdered on February 13th in 2017 in the small city in Indiana called Delphi. Now, I'm really excited for this week's episode because I did uncover some interesting information that I don't think is publicly discussed, I would say, in the public forums regarding this case in Reddit. On podcasts, etc., etc. I'm not really certain how valuable that information will be, but it's definitely something interesting to think about. So pretty much let's get right into it, guys. Now, last time we actually managed to finish the official timeline of the case. We've talked a little bit about the new direction in this case, the sketches, and I guess the general sentiment that I felt towards the law enforcement. I'm actually quite glad that we, got the timeline out of the way finally. I was actually quite surprised that it took around 3 hours of podcasting, well, a little bit less than 3 hours of podcasting, to set the stage for the Delphi murders. Now, before we get into this week's sections of the Delphi Murders Investigations, I would like to mention that over the last few weeks, when I was digging into this case, I realized that there is a lot more to this situation than I had initially thought. I've ran into certain personalities online that are taking a really deep look into this case. I've, analyzed some of their theories, and I think I will mention some of them a little bit later on in this episode. Now, this means that I may potentially alter, the course of this investigation at some point. Probably not this week, since part 3 in my Delphi Murders investigation is pretty straightforward, to be honest with you guys. So that's just a heads up for you guys. Things may get really weird in the future episodes, but I will still try to keep it pretty straightforward this week. I would also like to mention that I've seen reports that certain investigators of this case, of the Delphi murders case, have actually been getting death threats. So I'm definitely curious to see what line of inquiry was used on their part to garner those death threats. And, if I start getting some, I actually think that would be pretty cool. With that being said, I want to quickly go through the sections of part 3 in the Delphi Murders investigation. So today I want to talk about the area and the physical evidence found during the police investigation. I also want to discuss the condition of the bodies and certain unverified details regarding the bodies. Also, I want to talk about the scene itself, as well as the theory that the girls may have been killed in a different location and then placed in the spot where they were located. Also, I want to talk about how could this potential theory even work from a logistical standpoint. And then lastly, I would like to finish off the episode by talking about the video and audio released by law enforcement in 2019 and what I believe we can, gather from those visual assets. And, the introductory part of this episode is done. And right now I'm jumping to my first section that I want to talk about, which is the general area where the girls were murdered. First of all, I think it's very important for us to talk a little bit about the city of Delphi itself. I think it's important because, there are some interesting key details here. I have a fact about Delphi that around 17% of the local population is living in poverty. Now, obviously, if someone is living in poverty, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who killed the girls also was living in poverty. In my opinion, there are more incentives for someone to commit crimes if that person is in a difficult financial situation. Now, the Delphi murders definitely don't seem to me like a crime for gain, at least to my knowledge, because apparently nothing was stolen of the girls, unless obviously bridge guy was paid off by someone. And currently I can't speculate on that because I haven't ran into a situation where bridge guy was potentially fulfilling a hit on the girls. I also found this very interesting chart from citydata.com, crime index, about the crime rate in Delphi compared to the US national average. And if we just take a quick look at this chart, right, as you can see, the crime rate compared to the US average in Delphi was actually quite low back in 2002, in 2003, 4, 5. Something happened in 2006 and 7 and 9 and 10, and to be honest, ever since 2006, well, this chart only goes up until 2015, the crime rate for some reason has increased. Now, one thing to mention here is, Delphi has a very low population. I believe it's around 3,000 people, so only a few additional, I assume, crimes really boosts, the ratio for the city. But for that to keep happening from what we can see for like multiple years, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at the chart. 2008 is missing, so I wonder what that was like. Yeah. Also, when you type in Delphi in Google search, pretty much only articles regarding the murders are shown. I almost feel like Delphi has become synonymous with, this event, the Delphi murders. Population density in Delphi is quite low, around 1,100 residents per square mile. We're gonna be jumping into the sex offender list of the general Delphi area, and this is where I uncovered something pretty interesting and pretty disturbing in my personal opinion. Okay, so to start off, according to the Indiana Sex and Violent Offender Registry, there are 13 registered sex offenders in Delphi at this point in time. However, on the citydata.com, it says that there are 14 sex offenders registered. So I think we could just get a gauge that in the city of Delphi, around 13 to 14 sex offenders are actually registered. I would assume that, when something like the Delphi murders happens, law enforcement most likely goes straight to the local sex offenders list, and they most likely investigate each one of these people, I would assume. Before I go into my findings regarding the local sex offenders in the area, I just want to mention that it always astonishes me how many sex offenders there are actually, just in the small city of Delphi, there are 13 to 14 sex offenders. I mean, the city is really small, and you have, some questionable people living there. Uh, this is pretty wild when you think about it, because someone in your neighborhood is most likely a sex offender. I guess that's just part of humanity. We do messed up things to fulfill our urges, with little regards to the victims. I find it a little bit funny that, when you open up, because this is public information at this point, Carroll County's, I guess, sex offenders, this is public information, and you could, if you Google it, I'm pretty sure you could find out where this is. I don't want to necessarily leave a link. I'm not sure if that's a nice link, to leave on the YouTube. Maybe that's a bad for the algorithm or whatever. I will say it's pretty interesting that when you go to the Carroll County Sheriff's, website regarding the sex offenders, you have a smiling Tobe Lozenby right there, just chilling in the banner of this website. And I assume, there's a lot of people who have some sort of a dislike or a distaste towards Tobe. And looking down at the sex offenders, that's probably a pretty ironic sight. I think that banner is definitely ironic, and some people may feel the same way I do a little bit. Now, obviously, when we are looking at the local sex offenders in the area, I think the most important thing is obviously their alibis, and whether or not they even lived in Delphi or had any sort of connection to Delphi, especially around February 2017, because this is the current list, right? And, I won't be looking into the alibis of any interesting sex offenders. However, there is a good way for us to gauge whether or not each one of these people in this list, in the database of Carroll County, had been living somewhere else than Delphi, since the other known addresses are also available for us to look into. So this is how we could gauge, out of these people, out of the list of people, whether or not a certain individual was even living in Delphi or had some sort of a connection to Delphi back in 2017. By verifying that the sex offender hadn't lived at any other addresses, we could probably speculate that the same sex offender was probably living in the general area at the time of the Delphi murders as well. Also, I will add that we have the information of where the crime was committed, so that can help us as well. We have the information where each one of these offenders committed their crimes, whether it was in Delphi, some other country, some state, maybe even another country, for all we know. And, when you go to the registry, right, and you type in Delphi, you actually get a list of 48 offenders. And, if we go a little bit back in this podcast, remember when I said that there are 13 or 14 offenders currently registered, right? Well, actually, these 48 offenders, they all have some sort of a connection to Delphi, if that makes sense. Now, they live in other nearby cities like Camden, Burlington. There's a city called Battleground. There's some people from Flora, from Kokomo, from Lafayette, but they all have a connection to Delphi. And now this connection is just wild. I will get into this connection pretty soon. Before that, I want to talk a little bit about another thing. Out of these 13 sex offenders, right, registered in Delphi, that actually live in Delphi, that don't necessarily have employment connection to Delphi, but actually live in Delphi, right? Out of the 13 people that are listed in this official registry, right, I actually found only 3 of them interesting in regards to this case. The others were either too old or too tall, since we are looking for someone below 6 foot. I'm pretty certain, it's been stated multiple times that this person was below 6 foot. So, and they're not super old, I would assume, not like in their 70s. So, some other criteria I applied to these people, and only 3 of them I found interesting. I don't want to dox them or get into them, because I don't think actually any of them had anything to do. They just fit the physical sort of description, and I wouldn't completely count them out at this point. And, another interesting fact, that out of these 13 sex offenders, one of them is actually a woman, a lady. Well, probably not much of a lady, but yeah, her level is sexually violent predator. And she actually lives in Delphi, just a interesting piece of information. And I believe she's like the only woman out of 48 people. Yeah, that's right. She's the only woman. So, just goes to show that even women could do some questionable things. And now I want to get into the juicy information that I've managed to find, that I think probably is not discussed all that much, and it's definitely something to think about, especially for everyone who's looking into this case. Well, the thing that I'm referring to is that, how I mentioned that there are 48 sex offenders connected to Delphi, but only 13 of those people actually live in Delphi. If we do the math here, I believe that leaves us with 35, right? 35 other sex offenders that are linked to Delphi. But how could they be linked if they don't live here? Well, I'm not saying every single one of them 35 people, but literally, I would say at least 30 of them actually work in Delphi, and they work in the same company called the Indiana Packers Corporation. This is crazy information right here. You have a whole bunch of sex offenders working at this meat plant, I believe. And I'm going through the list, and I'm not kidding you. 9 out of 10 people work in the Indiana Packers Corporation. And this is some really interesting information when I opened up the website for Indiana Packers Corporation, I would say. And there's a quote from Oscar, who works in shipping. "I wanted a job I could feel good about doing and that makes a difference. I get that in the meat industry. I do my best with each product as if it's going on my family's table because we're buying it too." That's an interesting quote. Indiana, from Maria, who is in Loin Boning. Indiana Packers is different people. I agree with you, Maria. Definitely different, from different cultures, working all towards one single goal: feeding the world with high quality pork. We have Frank from the production floor supervisor. "I always get good vibes." Yo, this guy, this is his quote. "I always get good vibes when I walk down IPC's hallways, Indiana Packers Corporation hallways. I bet 98 of the people know me by name. I feel like I'm wanted here, that I'm respected. It feels like a great place to be, surrounded by sex offenders. And on the website, the corporation states that what is required to be a successful, employee with the Indiana Packers Corporation, a few common but critical capabilities. I won't get into them, but like purpose, passion, and pride. That's quite a slogan for sure. And when you look at the geographical position of this meat factory, meat plant, right, it's actually right next to the highway that you could take for around a couple of miles, right, 2 miles, and you would actually arrive at an abandoned CPS building. I'm not saying that, uh, anyone from the Indiana Meat Packers Corporation actually drove there during their shift, because at around, let's say, when the girls were dropped off, I think that's definitely, still like working hours. So I'm not saying that anyone just had an urge, working on some meat to go, work on real life meat, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying that that was the case, but this is just an interesting thing to think about, that, 2 miles away from where the girls were murdered, there's this, meat factory with like a bunch of sex offenders, which is, it's out there. And also one thing I would like to mention here is the quote from law enforcement on the New Direction press conference after releasing the new sketch. The quote was, "We also believe that this person is from Delphi currently or has previously lived here, visits Delphi at, a regular basis, or works here." Works here. Let's focus on that word, works. Did the police sort of have some sort of, an effort to look into the meat factory? Who knows, right? They also stated that, we believe this person is currently between the age range of 18 and 40, but might appear younger than his true age. I think I will talk about this a little bit later on in the show. And since I've already been talking a little bit about the abandoned CPS building, remember that same place where on part 1 of the Delphi Murders Investigation, I sort of hinted that police actually suspect that, potentially Bridge Guy actually parked his car there, and that car was left there between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. So for 5 hours. Well, actually, I will say over this past week, I have looked into some very interesting details regarding that particular vehicle left at the CPS building, and it seems to me like the local residents have actually identified this vehicle. Now, I'm not sure about the credibility of this verification of that particular vehicle left at the CPS building, and I have not yet looked into it in depth. I'll leave this detail for, the person of interest episode that I will do later on in this series. Just a little hint, it's part of Matt Sullivan's proposed theory. I want to leave that for later episodes, as it's very speculative. And for now, I actually want to avoid talking about that on part 3. And so this would conclude the general look into the sex offender list, right? As of right now, I don't want to disclose any more information regarding the sex offenders in the general area, since I'm not looking into persons of interest just yet. And in general, it could very well be that the Bridge Guy is actually not a sex offender, and Bridge Guy may have never even been a local of Delphi in the first place. So it's all just very speculative at this point. And since we're still looking into the general area, right? We're still in the general area section of this podcast. I want to show you this video where this one guy actually proposes a different path that the girls may have been ordered down the hill. There's another way down the hill, according to this man, and I found it very interesting. I want to share this video with you.
I don't know if this has been speculated. I don't know why not. If you go about 30 feet behind that red rail off the property, well, here's a much more gentle slope down the hill. That could easily have been the route.
At the same time, I want to show another video from this man's YouTube page. It's the same man, and in 2019 he made a video, and in his sort of description of the video, he stated that the trail is pretty much vacant and he did not encounter anyone on his walk. That's just something to think about. So here's the video.
Okay, I made it to the end of the bridge. I have to say, contrary to conventional wisdom, faster is better than slower. At least for someone like myself with size 14 clumsy feet. I was just visually inspecting the ones in front of me, taking two at a time, not looking down as much as I thought I would, and just getting it over with. Also, I have to dispute the notion that there were arguments under the bridge. Nobody's having conventions around here. These trails are vacant, no matter where I've been in Delphi or elsewhere in this region. So, tragically, they were on their own, and one perpetrator followed them. Now here we are, nearing the infamous down the hill area, and it looks to be about 50 feet to the rail behind.
I think it's pretty important to talk about the actual bridge itself a little bit. It has these 6 platforms, right? And because of these platforms, we could get a better understanding of where the girls were at during when the Snapchat pictures were taken. Both of these Snapchats, right? Snapchat pictures were actually taken on the bridge itself, and not as some people may believe that they were taken at the beginning and the end of the bridge, because that was my assumption, that they were taken, the first Snapchat of the bridge itself was taken before they entered the bridge, and the second Snapchat, of Liberty crossing the bridge, of Abigail crossing the bridge, I sort of assumed that Liberty had already crossed the bridge and she was taking a picture of Abigail, but I assume, from what I've gathered, that they're still on the bridge while these pictures are taken. That's something to think about as well. To walk across the bridge, it would actually take around 10 minutes, which makes sense. It does seem like quite a walk, especially if you're not rushing, because it's probably not a good idea to rush on that bridge. It looks very dangerous. At the end of the bridge, the trail ends, and there are these red borders that separate the trail from the private property. And however, you could continue walking past those red borders into the private lands. In my opinion, right, the girls were potentially held at gunpoint before they ever had a chance to run there. Now, I don't want to speculate whether Liberty was filming the video on the end of the bridge, or if she was filming while she was still on the bridge, maybe standing on the 6th platform, the last platform of the Monon High Bridge. However, from the video that has been released to us, I definitely think they were far enough to just run away past the red borders into private property. Since the very beginning, I had a sense, and this is just me speculating right now, that the girls didn't want to run at this point. When Liberty was filming Bridge Guy approaching them, they didn't want to run because it's a socially awkward thing to do, and as someone who's a little bit socially awkward, that's what I'm getting. Maybe that was not the case, but that's just sort of the feeling that I've had, that they started to film this guy because if Liberty started to record a potential crime about to happen, and from what I've gathered, she did so in a manner where she hid her phone a little bit, so that Bridge Guy wouldn't notice that Liberty is filming her. I do wonder why they didn't just run instead of starting the recording. What's the point of recording Bridge Guy? Why not just run past the red borders? In my opinion, there's definitely a way to just run into the privately owned lands. From what I've looked into, the general area, the videos that I've seen, you could just run past those red borders into the private land. I don't really understand what else could have made the girls not run, because I do believe that it was a somewhat of a socially awkward thing to do, to run. At least that's what I'm getting at. Another thing I want to talk about is that hill, that the girls most likely were ordered down, down the hill by bridge guy. And that's the hill that I'm assuming, it's the hill that is right to the left. Once you get past the Mountain High Bridge, immediately to the left, you have this little hill that would lead you, towards the private driveway. And after you pass the private driveway, you would then approach the Deer Creek, right? So I just want to mention that that bridge looks really, really steep. Like, it's pretty steep. And I would actually assume that handling two young girls down the hill, two young, some athletic girls, they were both athletes, would be a pretty difficult task. However, maybe not at gunpoint. So I do believe that, the bridge guy had a gun that he, pistol whipped, and that's how he managed to control the girls at that point. But I will say that it seems to me that right after you get down that initial steep hill and walk past that private driveway, the walk towards the Deer Creek is actually pretty straightforward, and the creek itself definitely doesn't seem super difficult to cross. And I will say that the general area looks very secluded around the creek. It seems like, from the videos that I've seen, not much is actually going on in that particular area. Once you get past that driveway, around 50 feet into the shoreline of the creek, the girls' bodies were actually located the following day, when they went missing on the 14th of February 2017. Let's remember that it's still unknown whether or not the girls were led past the creek. We're assuming that they walked past the creek, but we don't know that. I personally believe that that was the case, but we don't know that, that they were walked past the creek into the property of Ron Logan. It's, that line of thinking is just widely accepted. That's the widely accepted route that bridge guy and the girls took. Now, another thing I want to mention that, from watching multiple videos on the general location, if they really did pass the creek, which I believe they did, to get to Ron Logan's property, which I believe, that's what's happened, it does seem to me like a very pre-planned destination was chosen by bridge guy. Now, I find it very hard to believe that bridge guy wouldn't have known the general location beforehand, and he was just leading the girls, not knowing where he would end up. I definitely think bridge guy knew where he was going, and this belief is even strengthened by the fact that bridge guy was pretty adamant to take them down the hill, as if he had planned it beforehand, or because he was just, familiar with the general area and knew where they would end up eventually. When he said, guys, down the hill, I believe, I believe it sounded to me personally like a man saying, giving an order that he is sure of. Like, he had that idea in his head to lead the girls down the hill even before, he encountered them pretty much at that point. I also want to talk a little bit about the barns, and maybe some other interesting locations around the trail, as it has been speculated that the girls may have been taken to one of these barns and killed there. And, after the fact, the bodies were moved to the location where they were found the following day. While I don't have enough information and I am not leaning toward this line of thinking as of right now, I do see at least two reasons why this particular theory that the girls were killed somewhere else gains strength. The first being that it's probably a safer way for whomever killed the girls to get themselves inside a barn or some other structure, since the girls' potential screams would not be heard as much, it would make it harder for one of them to escape if they were, in some confined area, and also it would decrease the chances of a random person running into them. And lastly, if we think that the bodies were almost decapitated, I will address this shortly, and maybe even tortured to some extent, right? These things would also be a lot easier to achieve in a confined space, a structure, a barn for say, Another reason why this theory gains strength to my understanding, and I will get into this a little bit in the next section or the following section, is that apparently there are, to my understanding, unverified claims that the crime scene was somewhat clean and seemed untouched, relatively, as if the girls were placed there after they were already killed. I'm not really sure about these details, so I don't want to speculate right now too much. And I definitely want to mention a con for this theory, in my opinion, so I don't really see the logic behind killing the girls and then dumping their bodies into the wooded area, all doing this, while potentially seeing Derek's and other family members' incoming phone calls, text messages, etc. on Liberty's phone, which would indicate that a massive search for them has already began. I don't know if that's what happened. I just don't have the information right now. I just can't get behind it currently. I can't get behind this theory, in my personal opinion. With that being said, I believe that there are some interesting structures for us to look at nevertheless, right? So if you're just gonna jump to the map, right? So from the map right now, I'm looking at the map, and I want to initially mention a few other areas of interest that, search warrants have been served in those areas. We have that one really interesting location at Bicycle Road, where a search warrant was filed, but no arrests were made on the 16th of February 2017. So around 3 days after the girls were killed, there was a search warrant served in that particular property in Bicycle Bridge. Another interesting location is Peru, a city of Peru, on the 25th of February. So, I'm assuming just around a week or two after the girls were killed, there was a search warrant served in that city at a Peru home. After receiving information regarding the killings of the two Delphi teens. According to FBI spokesperson Wendy Osborne, a state search warrant was executed Saturday afternoon on a home on Canal Street in the city of Peru, but apparently no arrests were made. And lastly, we have actually a home in Lebanon, which is a home a little bit down south from Delphi. The date and address is unknown, so we don't really know when this search warrant was served. I'm assuming it happened pretty shortly after the the girls' bodies were found. We don't have much information other than nothing came out of that particular search warrant. So that's these are the areas that I wanted to mention. outside of Delphi, but there is this one very interesting area, right, that I think it's worth mentioning. It's called Mears Barn. Mears Barn. So this Mears Barn is on the other side of the road from Ron Logan's home, and it's actually fairly close by to the general location where the girls' bodies were found, and it is speculated online that the girls may have been taken to this Mears barn, killed there, and then later on, their bodies were placed in the location next to the Deer Creek, back into the woodlands, for, I guess, the law enforcement to find for some reason. Now, I will say I don't really have a lot of information regarding this, why people believe that, some people believe that the girls were killed in Mears Barn. Another hint, it has to do with Matt Sullivan's general theory, and actually on his YouTube channel he stopped right at around episode number 3, where he was where he sort of talks a little bit about how that the girls were killed in Mears Barn, but he sort of gave us some information that on episode 4, which is not released as of this recording, he will explain his reasoning for believing that the girls were killed in Mears Barn and then placed back into the general area where they were found. I don't want to speculate too much. I know that Matt Sullivan has a pretty dedicated Facebook group. I know there's like Facebook group beefs going on right now. I don't want to get into the action with these people, so I will just leave it there. I guess if anyone is interested in finding out more about this Mears Barn theory, just look at Matt Sullivan's YouTube channel, and I think on episode 4 he will give us his explanation why the girls were killed there and then later on placed in the general location where they were found the following day. Right, so with the general area out of the picture, I'm glad that I've got to talk a little bit about the general area. Those were the facts that I found very interesting during my research. I want to move into the next section, which is the physical evidence found in this case. A quick note to mention that a big complication, of this investigation is the fact that these trails, right, are actually used as if they were public spaces. So that means that the evidence collected could easily be unrelated to this case. The evidence that were collected that I will mention right now, they could be completely unrelated to the case. So just keep that in mind while I go through, the physical evidence. It would be wrong to assume that all of the items collected, end up being related to this case. That's impossible, in my opinion. I mean, the area is so wide. How could they leave items of interest all over the place? I'm assuming only a certain set of items were actually connected to the case itself. So guys, just please keep that in mind when discussing the physical evidence and listening to what I have to say regarding the physical evidence. So since law enforcement is very hesitant to disclose information regarding this case, I'm sure if you listen to the first 2 parts of my Delphi Murders Investigation series, you already know what I'm talking about. Pretty much the only information regarding the physical evidence found comes from leaked police scanners that were intercepted by locals before law enforcement switched to a private radio channel, because initially when law enforcement was talking to themselves, regarding their search, they were talking on a public radio channel that anyone could intercept pretty much. But then after some time, they switched to a private radio channel that no one could hear about. Also, we have a photographer who was taking pictures of the search, of the scene, of the local location and things like that. He also made some interesting comments that I will address shortly. So I have the clips and I would like to play them for you guys. The clips of, the intercepted conversations between law enforcement workers on this case. In the first clip, we can hear a piece of clothing being described. I want to play this clip for you guys, so just listen in.
Fire 15, squad 2. Send it. Found an item of interest under the railroad bridge. Copy that. Go ahead and describe it to me. Girls' undergarments. Good copy. Thank you. Stand by.
Another clip that I have for you guys is of a conversation where a cigarette butt, cigarette butts, is being described by law enforcement. Also stated that the condition of this particular, cigarette butt was probably less than 2 to 3 days old.
2 Fire 15. Go ahead. It's on their way with evidence back, so just stand by there. They're on their way. They're coming through the water, by the way. There's at least 2 pieces of evidence so far. So you found more? What's the second thing you found? Because I'm only sending one evidence back. I have a cigarette butt in the water that is less than 2 or 3 days old. Okay, good copy.
So from these 2 clips, what we can gather is fairly unknown, to be honest. It's unknown to the public. I will say that I have someone who has transcribed these, conversations. And one of these conversations, the initial clip, the first clip that I played for you guys, apparently it mentions something about underwear being inside of an evidence bag, to my understanding. Yeah, and then another one, the second one is about cigarette butt in the water that is less than 2 or 3 days old, pretty much. And that's all we know about these 2 details. That some clothing was found and the cigarette butt was found in the water. I think both of these two items were actually found in Deer Creek, if I'm not mistaken. Guys, remember when I was just recently mentioned that photographer who was taking pictures of the scene? Well, basically a newspaper photographer, J. Kyle Keener, added a description to his Facebook photo album in which he describes what he could see in the creek on February 14th, 2017. Basically, I want to read this description that he left because he got the pictures that he took from the scene and he made like a photo album on Facebook and added a description to that photo album. And I want to read that description to you guys. I think it's very important. Right, so this is what Kyle Keener said. It has been a tragic day in Carroll County, Indiana, the scene of a double murder. One thing they never teach you in journalism school is how creepy it feels to have to cover a homicide. For several hours, I photographed the search for the 2 missing 13-year-old girls. This type of endeavor is stressful for the searchers, the first responders, and also the media at the scene. Detectives found the bodies of 2 missing teens near a rural hiking trail below the abandoned Monon High Railroad Bridge. The bridge itself is incredibly beautiful, making it difficult to witness a horrific murder scene so nearby. From 75 yards away, I could see girls' clothing in Deer Creek, east of the bridge, and knew full well that the girls were found very nearby. To walk in a place that a murderer has walked only a handful of hours earlier is extremely upsetting, but as a journalist, it is part of the business that simply needs done to tell the news of our area. So, photos by Kyle Keener, Pharaoh's Tribune, copyright 2007. The one thing we need to focus from this description is where he says, from 75 yards away, I could see girls' clothing in Deer Creek, because this, believe it or not, is probably the most credible public information that we have, that one of the girls' clothing was in Deer Creek, and that piece of clothing was from Liberty. At least that's what the general consensus is, because the general consensus, or at least if you believe David Erskine, that I will get into shortly, Liberty had her clothes removed, or at least some of her clothing removed, and I believe the clothing that was witnessed in Deer Creek from Kyle Keener, the photographer, was of Liberty German. And this naturally raises questions to me. First of all, why were the girls' clothing in the water? How does that make any sense? And if, the pieces of clothing, or the piece of clothing, I'm not sure whether multiple pieces were found in the water. If they were found in the water, did no one notice them during the initial search on February 13th? The first day of the search? I know it was getting dark, but still, I would think that, a piece of clothing floating in Deer Creek would have been noticed. I think the clothing part is a huge gray area, and it does not make that much sense to me that they were found in the creek. I don't really understand this detail fully. Also, let's remember that Kelsey German, right, Liberty's sister, described being under the bridge and being called out to by a group searching. This is the quote. And somebody yelled up that they had found a shoe. And when they had found the shoe, they had asked what kind of a shoe, the girls were wearing. And they yelled out the type of shoe that Libby was wearing. So I yelled down and told them that. This is Kelsey German's quote. It's a little bit hard to understand this quote, to be honest with you guys. But I did find some information that the shoe, right, was actually a quarter of a mile from where Kelsey searched. There was the shoe found, and the shoe was actually Liberty's black Nike shoe. So that's the information that I found, that particular shoe that was found was of the Nike shoe that Liberty was wearing. And after they saw that shoe, within moments, the girls were later found, right? But to me personally, I don't really understand this whole shoe situation, just as I don't really understand the piece of clothing floating in Deer Creek situation. Now, why I say that is because apparently within moments after the shoe being located that belonged to Liberty German, the girls' bodies were found. Okay, that would make sense, right? If the shoe was next to the girls' bodies, but apparently from my research, the Nike shoe was not next to the girls. The shoe was actually on the other side of Deer Creek. And apparently, from what I've gathered, the shoe must have fallen off of Liberty's feet right before Bridge Guy, potentially, we don't know this fact, but potentially they all crossed Deer Creek. So right before they crossed Deer Creek, Liberty's black Nike shoe must have fallen off her foot, but Bridge Guy didn't let her pick that shoe up and just ordered them to cross the Deer Creek. Now, I don't really understand, how do you locate that black Nike shoe on the other side of the Deer Creek from where the girls were found, and then moments after find the girls' bodies, which doesn't really make sense to me. I would sort of understand if the shoe was right next to the girls. Yeah, then you find the bodies, right? And then the whole situation with the two deer in the situation, I don't really know. And like, this is really getting messy. I don't know what relevance these details have to us figuring out who Bridge Guy was. But I will say one thing I found interesting. One of the commenters on my other video, I think part 2, actually said that he found it very suspicious that there were all of these searchers walking, searching, trying to locate the girls' bodies. A lot of commotion in the general area during the search was happening. How would Deer be still present? Wouldn't Deer be scared? Wouldn't Deer just like sort of run away? So that was an interesting comment from someone in the comments. I can't really remember that person, but kudos for that very good insight for sure. I want to talk a little bit about the footprints that were found leading up to the bodies, when the bodies were actually found for the first time by volunteers. So footprints can be casted and molded actually by forensic teams, and they can sometimes indicate the approximate height and weight of a person. Now, the quality and relevance of these footprints is actually unknown, so I did think on part 2 that the footprints was a crazy underlooked detail, but apparently we can only speculate, because man, this just really makes me think that law enforcement should give us something else. It really is hard to try to figure out who Bridge Guy is when law enforcement has all the information. Another piece of information is that the girls were actually laying on the ground at the crime scene and could have been spotted from as far as 300 yards away. So that's another thing for us to think about. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with HLN's Down the Hill podcast. It's pretty much this really professionally made podcast that features a lot of like detectives, investigators, law enforcement people, and they all talk about this case. And there has been some information, some really interesting information released on that HLN's Down the Hill podcast. So one of the interesting quotes, or maybe like a detail that I would like to mention from that podcast, is that law enforcement stated that one of the girls likely witnessed the murder of the other girl, which is, just a dark thought to have right there. Also, from that podcast, former Carroll County prosecutor Robert Ives, this is his quote. He quoted, "There's a lot more physical evidence at the crime scene. It's probably not what you imagine." So, that's, since we're still talking about the physical evidence, I just thought I would mention that quote because I find it really interesting, that he said it's probably not what you might imagine. Now, to me, that particular statement probably means that they have a whole bunch of like physical evidence that is probably unrelated to the case, if you know what I mean, that they can't really use, but they're maybe trying to figure out if they can use it. I'm not really sure what kind of an evidence that would be. I think what he also wanted to say by, saying this exact quote is that people would probably assume like blood, a knife, like a piece of hair or like some sort of a DNA. They probably don't have that physical evidence. They probably have slight things, maybe like, as I've said, footprints. Maybe, I don't know, those cigarette butts. I don't know. Maybe they're still trying to figure out who they actually belong to. Small things like that. They don't have from what I've gathered, they don't have the stereotypical physical evidence, a knife, like a bullet, or or something like that. They probably don't have any of this. He also, prosecutor Robert Eves refers to the crime scene generally as weird and unique, which is interesting. That makes that, from what we can gauge from that, is that the crime scene was actually unusual. Another important thing to mention about the crime scene is that apparently it was contaminated by searchers. I believe that the cigarette butts, right, footprints, and some spit found may have potentially came from the searchers and not Bridge Guy, and this is what hampered the investigation. I wonder if the searchers were given instructions on how to conduct the search in the first place without contaminating the area. I'm really curious if they were actually given that instruction. I'm sort of leaning towards that. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. I'm not really sure. Right, so at this point, I actually want to move to the condition of the bodies at the scene section, right? So I have a little quote here that, from Becky Patty. Her quote is regarding the person who found the bodies, because I think it's important for us to start off with this quote. He saw something, he could not figure out what it was. There were two deer standing up there, and he looked up to see what it was. That is when he saw them. That's what the quote is. The quotes are really all over the place here. It's really hard to gauge sometimes from these quotes. Also, she said that they were lying in the grass between a group of trees deep in the woods, right? From looking at the images of, the crime scene, yeah, it really is just, a pretty wooded area. There's not much foliage, given the season. It was winter. Nothing else that I could pick up from the images of the crime scene. I can't really see anything interesting from the pictures taken. So that's one thing to mention regarding the pictures. The exact body disposal location has never been released by law enforcement. That's a fact. Law enforcement has said that the disposal site was around half a mile away from the end of the bridge and across the Deer Creek, so apparently a half a mile away from when Liberty was actually filming Bridge Guy approaching them. The autopsies are completely sealed, as this is an active investigation, so we don't have autopsy information, obviously. There are theories online that the girls have been posed at the crime scene. I can't seem to figure out the credibility of these claims. I will talk about this shortly. Now, another interesting fact, Washington's state attorney general posted stats from the time period of 1982 to 2002. So, for 20 years back in the day. And, the stats from that period are that 1.3%, so only 1.3% of victims are left in an unusual position with only 0.3%, so very small amount, being posed and only 0.1% being staged, right? So this information is actually posted in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, and it's just something for us to think about, that if the girls were posed, it's a really rare occurrence for that to happen. So I don't know what to make of it. Now, I do have information why they were posed. I will get into this really shortly. Now, from what I've gathered, this information that the girls have been posed actually originated from a man named David Erskine, who is apparently Abigail's uncle, if I'm not mistaken, and he has some leaked text messages, right? So David Erskine, right? He is apparently someone who was, one of the people during the search who had seen or at least had a glimpse of the bodies of the girls. And before I jump into his leaked text messages, I just want to mention the fact that actually David Erskine's leaked text messages, he actually verified them fairly recently. So I believe it was back in 2020. And I have this screenshot of a person named Sherry messaging David asking, but just to clarify, you did say you sent those texts in the beginning about what you saw, right? And then David Erskine reported yes. So apparently this is the big clue that everyone's saying that, yo, this dude just verified those texts. And which texts, you may ask? Let's go through the texts right now. The first leaked screenshot of Derek Erskine's texts are of him responding in this text message, "No, I'm fine. Me and my other sister's boyfriends are the ones who found the girls Tuesday. Not much worse you can show me," indicating that he saw something really bad, like really sinister, right? The second screenshot I want to read is someone asking David, you told me you found the girls. I just want to confirm the second person with you was Iwan and the third was a lady. And then David responds, "No, my sister's husband." And then we called two county deputies, Drew Yoder and Darren Ganosola. First of all, I want to stop here and say that there's a lot of speculation that these text messages have been faked, and I always thought it was pretty interesting how David responded in such a interesting manner, stating that the exact names of the county deputies. Would you really not just say we call the two county deputies? Would you say the exact names of the deputies? But I will say, since I think this particular text message, if it was real, right, it was asked in a sense of trying to figure out who the exact people were at the crime scene, and David was probably really trying to emphasize who the exact people were, and that's why he mentioned the names, because apparently people right now online are thinking that these are real after that Sherry person, just messaged him on Facebook and he said yes. Yeah. Okay, so this next screenshot is a bit tricky. We only see the beginning of the conversation where apparently David is responding to an unknown message by saying, "Not even close." We don't really see what the other person is asking, but David is saying not even close. Now, this other person then says, "Okay, so this is a sick rumor and I am sorry to have to show you this. Thanks for letting me know." This probably indicates to me that the messages that we don't see from the screenshot probably was of something gruesome, asking about like some gruesome details to David, and then David says, "Nope, that was not even close." And then David actually responded, "No, that's not her nor Libby. Abby was placed there on the ground like a doll, hooded up, hands folded, wearing the same clothes as the pic from the bridge." The same clothing that Liberty took a picture of Abigail, where Abigail was wearing those clothes, right? So this exact screenshot and that response was the key catalyst for all of the speculation that the girls' bodies were posed. That's the key reason why people believe that the girls' bodies were posed. And this is gonna get really stupid right now. Just wait a little bit, guys. This is not a really stupid one, but this is the next one I want to read to you guys. Is David saying to someone, "Coroner's report stated everything was over by 3:30, no rape," indicating that sexual assault did not happen. Now the other person asks, I'm assuming, "But I was told the report was not released. Becky Patty told me the families have not been told whether they were raped or not." David replies, and she lied to you, indicating that Becky Patty has lied to the person who is inquiring all of this information, to David Erskine. And then this person replies, also, Abby survived until the next day. She tried to crawl away, which is crazy to me, but I don't know. It seems like I don't really understand this last part, right? This is the really stupid part, actually, where also Abby survived until the next day. She tried to crawl away, but the previous screenshot that I've showed you said that Abby was posed in a really weird position. So if she was, she could only have been posed if she was killed. But if she survived and then tried to crawl away the next day, how would she be posed? If she was posed, she had to be killed and then posed. You can't kill someone, pose their bodies, but then that person survives and tries to crawl away. If you know what I mean. Like, this doesn't add up at all at this point. So this is really stupid. Like, these leaked screenshots are really stupid right now. And I guess this next screenshot is the big one, right? This is the big one, the really big one, right? So David Erskine says they were not bounded, they were touching but not tied together. Abby was dressed, Libby was nude, Libby's top half was covered with leaves and sticks, almost like they were trying to cover her. The other person says, but you said there was no rape. If there was no rape, there is no DNA. Well, obviously, you could get DNA even if there is no rape. So I don't know. This person wasn't really thinking straight when he wrote that, but Derek responded, correct. I don't know why she was nude, but I read the coroner's report. The only DNA would be from Libby's fingernails. She fought like hell. This is an interesting fact. Now, the other person replied, yes, maybe it is the DNA they are referring to. Please let me know if there is anything else, and if I come across anything, I will contact you. And then lastly, we have, I guess, the cherry on top of the cake. Derek saying, whoever did this, right, targeted Libby for sure and knew what they were doing with Abby. It was personal with Libby. Now the other person responded, yes, I heard Libby had most of the injuries, but it could be that she was trying to defend Abby. She was bigger. And now David says this is the cherry on top of the cake. David says, Libby's head was an inch away from being taken completely off. Abby was stabbed in the heart and artery in her neck. Right. So I'm assuming this is the main detail that led everyone to think, or at least most people to think, that potentially, Bridge Guy sort of almost like decapitated Liberty's head. You know what I mean? That's really heavy, and just in general, investigators really wondered who would do these things to the girls, during the multiple press conferences and things like that. For me personally, like, the general feeling was that the homicides were unusually heinous. Like, I've just got this sense from, looking at the facial expressions of law enforcement, people, who saw the actual scene, the way they talked about it just made me feel like it was not a pretty scene. I also want to talk a little bit about the DNA. So law enforcement has recovered DNA from the crime scene. Now, whether law enforcement is sure that the DNA that they have recovered is actually from the offender, from Bridge Guy or whatever, this is unknown. We do not know if, law enforcement is 100% certain that the DNA that they had collected, belonged to the culprit. Also, the quality of the DNA collected is also unknown. We don't know you know, we don't really know what physical evidence is being looked at by law enforcement, and what DNA they have. Is it spit? Because I've heard something about some spit being in the scene. I mean, that could be from anyone, right? Those cigarette butts. Do we think that, Bridge Guy was, you know, still smoking cigarettes after that? I don't really know. I don't really know. Maybe on the girls' bodies, I mean, surely there's some DNA, right? I mean, I'm not an expert, but actually on August 14th, 2017, Indiana State Police First Sergeant Jerry Holman has confirmed that law enforcement does in fact have DNA evidence, and I have his quote. So he said, "At every crime scene, you're going to have DNA. We are still working on identifying all of the DNA that we have here." So that's his quote. That pretty much indicates that they do have DNA. There are some theories that the crime scene was very clean, like pristine condition. I don't want to speculate too much regarding that, since there are many details that don't add up regarding the crime scene, like, Liberty's clothing being in the creek, and the whole situation with the Nike shoe apparently being on the other side of the creek where the girls were found. I don't really know how that would work. Also, conflicting statements from David Erskine's texts, which I don't really know how to interpret, and actually I would be really curious to see who originated those texts, because I'm sure that David himself probably did not leak those text messages. So I'm really curious to know. Maybe some of my audience members know where those particular text messages have originated from. Like, who is the originator of them being leaked? With that being said, finally, it took us almost 3 full episodes on the pretty much podcast regarding these murders to finally get to the point where I want to discuss, or I should say analyze a little bit, the released visual and audio assets. Initially I actually planned to talk about, the released video and the voice clip, and speculate a little bit on those two things on the first episode, on part 1 of the Delphi Murders investigation. However, I was not able to do that because there just was too much information for me to dissect. But now we can finally get into this. Right, so, let's take a look at the video that has been released by law enforcement. I have it on loop. It's around 1 second of Bridge Guy walking. So when we're looking at from, a looped standpoint where the video is, a loop, I think we could sort of really get a better gauge of how he actually walks. And the first thing that I want to talk a little bit about is whether or not we really do see a limp, because this limp, online is being said that there's of course there's a limp. He clearly is limping. I think law enforcement mentioned that he's limping. And initially when I was looking into this footage, I was just staring at it for 5 minutes, trying to look at his feet. And at first I didn't really understand where this whole limping theory came from, because to me it just seemed like maybe a weird walk, but it's not necessarily a walk that I would say, oh, he's clearly limping, right? I personally don't see him clearly limping. However, right at the time when this video loops, and it restarts from the beginning of the 1 second clip that has been released by law enforcement, I'm looking at his right leg, right? And it actually does seem to me like he places his right leg, if you guys just took a look at this image footage right now, it does seem like he places his right leg softly, if you know what I mean. At least to me personally, it's almost like he has an injury in his right leg, and he's sort of placing it very softly. And you know how you have to sort of put pressure on your leg when you're, placing it on the ground. It seems like he's trying to decrease the amount of pressure he puts on his right leg, because to me personally, his left leg seems like it seems like he's walking normally with his left leg, but it does seem to me that he's trying to put as little pressure as he possibly can on his right leg. So I now, after looking at it, I do see the limping theory, that he has a limp. I do see it a little bit here for sure. Also, I think it's very important to mention that this is just my speculation, and he could have just been walking carefully on the bridge, because remember, the bridge is a very dangerous place, so he could just be walking in a very protective manner, trying to avoid maybe getting his foot stuck in between the tiles on the bridge, because in between the two tiles there's nothing pretty much. So maybe that's what's he's actually doing. Maybe he's just being careful. But I will say I do see the limp, and I wouldn't past it past the theory that he does not have a limp. I think he may have a limp. That's what I'm saying. I'm not sure. He may have it. Now, another thing worth mentioning here is, if he did have a limp and something was not 100% with one of his legs, which, if he did have a limp, I would probably guess that it was a limp on the right leg, as I've mentioned before. Would he really want to go that steep hill? And just in general, I'm watching right now another video where I can see pretty much the hill, and the hill is really, really steep, and it's not just a clear-cut hill. There's like a whole bunch of like little sticks, things like that, like inconsistencies. I don't know. It seems like this reason, the potential limp, and the fact that the hill is very steep, at least from what I can see right now. I wouldn't put it past the bridge guy to walk with them a little bit further, I would say. After the bridge ends, a little bit further away, maybe where the hill potentially becomes less steep, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. Because I don't know, a potential dude with a limp, let alone he's also having to control two other young girls, which one of them, let's remember, Liberty weighed just as much as he did, apparently, from what the description we have of Bridge Guy. He weighed just around the same weight as Liberty, and you also have Abigail. I know that he probably had a gun, but still, not to expect one of them to run. I don't know. It's tricky. It's a tricky situation, and this makes me really question what was the exact route that they took. I also have some enhanced pictures, I guess stills of Bridge Guy. The first one that I wanna discuss is this enhanced face. I'm assuming this is pretty much as enhanced as it gets. And right now I have them right next to the two sketches of the guy. I will say, like, one of the big, literally big things is his nose. Like, it's a big nose, if that is his nose, I would say. It definitely looks more familiar, or resembles the initial sketch, the older sketch with the taxi cab. And actually, since, on part 2, maybe some of you guys already remember that I did emphasize the fact that the newer released sketch, right, the younger man in the sketch has a more defined nose. I wonder why police focused on that, because, from this enhanced sketch, we do see that the nose is quite big and would probably resemble more the dude's, the first released sketches dude's nose, if you know what I mean. Obviously, this could just be some sort of issue with the picture, because the picture is definitely, low quality. So I don't want to speculate here too much, but from this particular image that I'm looking at right now, it definitely seems to me that the dude's nose is like massive, you could pretty much say. And I guess in this picture we have the more enhanced body of Bridge Guy, like the whole frame of Bridge Guy. I guess this is just literally one of the stills that was released by police, and they enhanced it. And now, as you can see, there's this yellow square right where his, I'm assuming, left arm is, like left hand is, right? To honestly, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at here. I just found this online. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be looking at. Maybe this, maybe the whoever made this, maybe they're indicating that this is where Bridge Guy potentially held his weapon, his handgun, for say. I will say, I find his left leg pretty interesting in this particular still image, because it does seem like there's some sort of a flat object under his jeans. I don't know what that could be. Maybe this is just how his jeans moved. They seemed like they were pretty flat. Those like pretty like flat American type jeans. I don't know. Like that. Maybe that's what it is. And also, I really don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at in the yellow square. Maybe some of my audience have some ideas what this square is sort of indicating, Now, according to a witness, and I do plan to talk a little bit about witnesses on part 4 of the Delphi Murders investigation, but according to one of the witnesses, Bridge Guy had a baseball type cap with flaps. Now, the only thing I want to mention here is that, as I'm going through some of the caps that could potentially resemble what he was wearing on that day, I will say it's not something a young person would probably wear, in my opinion. I would say this is the type of hat that would be worn by someone like over 30. In my personal opinion, that's how I would stereotype this hat. I mean, obviously anyone could wear this hat. You could put this hat like on a toddler, and then a toddler would have this hat. But I don't know, it just seems to me like something that you would probably not wear in your 20s, if that makes sense. Now I want to return a little bit to the video that we can see Bridge Guy walking. It does seem to me like he is either holding his hands in his pockets, or he is holding his waist. And if you would focus on Bridge Guy's right hand, I think we do see a silhouette of his hand, because I do think that's skin color right there. And it's interesting. Maybe he's actually, now when I think about it, maybe he's actually holding his waist and not having his hands in the pockets. I'm not really sure if we could really get anything useful out of that, knowing whether or not he was keeping his hands in his pockets. Yeah, so I'm probably gonna leave it at that. I just found it an interesting way to walk, just in general, how he walks. It seems unusual, because if he is holding his waist, which I tend to think that he may have done so, because look at that right hand, it doesn't look like it's in a pocket, it looks like it's holding his waist. I wonder, why would you do that? Is there a particular reason to hold your waist when you're walking across like a really dangerous bridge like that? Is there a chance he's holding something under his first layer, under that blue jacket, and he's sort of holding it up by holding his waist, if that makes sense. That's pretty interesting. And obviously we have to mention the fanny pack. My sentiment towards the fanny pack is about the same as to the cap with flaps. I think it's probably not anything that someone under 30 would wear. Actually, I think this wardrobe is probably pushing over 40, to be honest. So it makes me really it's really hard for me to imagine that this guy is like 21. Also, another thing to mention here is that the dude definitely seems overdressed for the occasion, because remember, as I've said in my first part of this investigation, it was a very warm winter day, and during the period from 12 a.m. to 18 p.m., just around the same period when the girls got captured and, killed most likely in that period of time, those 6 hours, the temperature was as high as 7 degrees Celsius, which is 44 Fahrenheit. Now, I don't know about Fahrenheit, but I definitely know about Celsius, and 7 degrees Celsius. I'm not wearing, a big jacket or the hat with flaps. I'm definitely not wearing the hat with flaps when it's 7 Celsius outside. And this is corroborated by Liberty's German Snapchat of Abigail Williams, where you could see like Abigail Williams. And she definitely looks like she's not dressed, as, I guess, her clothing layers are not as warm as bridge guys's are. And definitely seems to me like Abigail Williams is more appropriately dressed, for the occasion. I want to speculate here a little bit regarding bridge guys' clothes. I see two potential reasons for this apparent overdressing. Now, one of the reasons that I see is that he could have used the additional layers of clothing to conceal a weapon. The other reason would be that if his clothing would get too bloody after he commits a crime, killing someone, he could then remove the first layer, the jacket, and then just, stroll out of the general area in his cleaner, less suspicious outfit that doesn't have clothes on. He could just like either hold that jacket in his hands or something like that, the bloody jacket, or he could completely like dispose of it and, walk out after committing a crime in a more cleaner, less suspicious outfit. Obviously, this is all just my own personal speculation. Maybe a bridge guy just, likes overdressing, or he was cold or something and, that's how he dressed. Maybe I'm looking a little bit too much into it, but it's just something that I wanted to mention, And then also, upon further investigation, I don't think he had a GoPro on him. I'm pretty sure there are no witness reports about a GoPro, and when you look at the looped video of Bridge Guy, in my opinion, you can see that the shape of the proposed GoPro actually disappears on the final frames of the video, when he's slightly like tilting his head, I guess, just as everyone would when they're walking. I think that proposed area where the GoPro allegedly was, on his head, on the cap attached. I think that like object that is proposed to be the GoPro, I think it actually disappears on the final frames of that, looped video. So in conclusion, regarding the visual assets that we have, the mannerisms of the walk, the style of his clothing, especially the hat and the fanny pack, his wide old man's frame, if that makes sense. I get the sense that he's probably over 30. That's my rough guess. I find it hard to believe that Bridge Guy is a very young individual, and that's pretty weird because I find it hard to link the video clip, Bridge Guy from the video clip, to the second released sketch of the younger dude. I just really find it hard to believe that, that man walking on the bridge who really does seem like an older dude pretty much, just like a wide old man's body, like old man's clothes, not necessarily like super old, but like, definitely not like a 20 something year old. I really find it hard to believe that that new sketch could be this same dude. I don't know why we were given this sketch. Doug Carter stated that they had a lot of work done on the photo of Bridge Guy, and that he doesn't look at the head anymore. Instead, he looks at how Bridge Guy walks and talks. I wonder if they got more of Bridge Guy like on the video, or maybe additional audio of him speaking. I will say, probably in my opinion, law enforcement may have more audio, but they probably don't have more video of Bridge Guy, because what would be the reasoning for not showing the public when you're pleading for information, like everything you got? I think we saw everything Liberty managed to capture. Now this brings us to the audio. Apparently law enforcement knew one of the girls was scared based on what they heard her say, and their reports actually that apparently Abigail Williams, as she was approaching Liberty, to my understanding, on that video, this is not like verified to my understanding, she asked Liberty, because Liberty was like looking in the direction of Bridge Guy approaching them, while Abigail was walking towards Liberty. So Abigail's back was turned to Bridge Guy, and apparently Abigail Williams, I'm assuming, asked Liberty, is the strange man still behind me? Something along those lines. And then apparently I think Liberty said, like something like that, There are also unverified speculations that I actually think are probably true, to be honest with everyone, that Mike and Becky, the Patties, the grandparents of Liberty, as well as Anna Williams, the mother of Abigail Williams, had actually listened up to 2 minutes of the audio. I have this post, it's pretty interesting. I just want to read it to you. I'm not really sure where it comes from, but here's the story about the 2-minute video that was really audio. Mike Patty, Becky Patty, and Anna were able to listen to 2 minutes of audio from Liberty's phone. In the audio, what was heard was Abby asking Libby if the creepy guy was still following them. They could hear Libby saying, The girls were talking about where they should go, and then the next thing they heard was him saying down the hill. Then the next thing they heard was a gun being cocked. And actually Becky Patty has responded to this particular statement. This is why I wanted to bring it up, and her response was, okay, we did see a small clip of the video as law enforcement had a couple of questions on this part. At that time, Mike and I were asked not to discuss it, and I will continue to respect that request. I do not know where this information above came from and will not confirm anything concerning this. She's referring to the previously mentioned post. Personally, I think one of the most important and underlooked details in regards to the released audio is whether or not the audio that we can hear, guys muffle sounds down the hill, is a solid audio from a sentence, or was this audio cut from different parts, let's say 2 different parts of the video, and then mashed together? Now this is why I think this is, because, well, at first you only had down the hill, and now you have the additional word guys, and in between you have like some strange muffle sounds. So I'm thinking, did law enforcement actually cut two areas of the audio and pasted them in one place? Or was this a solid sentence, just as it was said by Bridge Guy? I'm really curious if maybe anyone in the audience know this. Personally, I will say that I'm leaning towards that the audio has not been cut from two different parts of the video, because we can actually hear that strange muffle sound in between the words guys and the sequence of words down the hill. If the audio was mashed together from two different parts, why would law enforcement include that weird muffle sound? And now this leaves us with the question, what exactly is that muffle sound, I want to play the audio a few times on loop as well. Pay attention to that muffle sound in between, guys and the sequence of words down the hill. Just pay attention to that muffle sound and try to think about what it could potentially be. After listening to the audio for, close to 3 dozen times or something like that, I will say that I do hear that muffled sound all throughout the clip, not only in between the two words. So it seems like that muffled sound is being heard all throughout. Now, what I'm thinking that the muffled sound could probably be, well, I'm assuming that Liberty German had that phone that she would had at the time in her pocket. I'm assuming that it was in her pocket. Now, if that phone is in her pocket, I think muffled sounds would not be heard, let's say, if she was just standing there. I'm assuming there was some sort of a physical motion from Liberty German, like she was moving when the guy said guys down the hill. And I will actually speculate that it could be that maybe at that particular point, Bridge Guy had already had his gun out, he had his gun out, and he grabbed Liberty for say, and he was sort of pulling her in one direction, because I'm assuming you would probably grab on to Liberty first because she's the bigger one and the stronger one than Abigail. So he probably would grab her, and I'm assuming he grabbed her and he was probably aiming the gun at Abigail or something like that at that point. Or, this is just a wild speculation, but I feel like that could have happened. And as he was pushing them towards the direction down the hill, he was actually saying down the hill. So I think that could have been the case, that, he got physical with them, as he was saying down the hill. So there's a lot of people who are thinking that he was actually being polite when he was saying down the hill, guys, go down the hill. I think that he already may have had some sort of a physical altercation with the girls as he was saying guys down the hills, because of that muffled sound that we hear all throughout in the background, all throughout the audio. It's like Liberty's was in some sort of a unfavorable motion, she was getting pushed a little bit. I'm just sensing that, that's just my speculation. Also, the word guys has been in, the forefront of people theorizing who the guy was, because apparently, America's foremost criminal profiler, John Douglas from, the Netflix show, what's it called? I think it's called Mindhunter. John Douglas, a very famous FBI profiler, insists that, his quote is, "Guys says to me that maybe he may know these victims," said Douglas. His quote is, "Or it's a person, someone who has interaction with children." I feel like the word guys could be used by anyone, so I'm not sure if I agree here, but I do understand his statements. I mean, I use guys all the time, and I have no interactions with children. So in conclusion to the visual and audio assets section of this investigation, of, part 3 of my investigation, I will say I find it quite interesting, and I can't really understand why would law enforcement keep the WAC video clip away from us for more than 2 years. And, they only released like 3 frames from the video initially. So we only had like 3 frames initially. When we're thinking about what they really didn't release to the public, well, they didn't release the manner of him walking, right? Because that's the only thing that you could actually get from the video that you could not get from the stills, is his walking mannerisms. And this just made me think, did law enforcement want to keep the walking mannerisms to themselves? When I look at the law enforcement in Delphi, or like just in general, the people who were involved, they don't seem to me like, I don't want to be rude here, but they don't seem to me like they're like geniuses, for say, if you know what I mean. So I would say they probably didn't think that deep, and that would lead me to believe that they really messed up by not releasing the video immediately. Like, I do understand them keeping the word guys to themselves, because that's how they could like sort of fan out all of the fake people who just want to claim that they killed the girls, because they would ask them, did you say anything before you ordered the girls down the hill? And then that person would probably not have an answer that the police was looking for, and they would think that he's lying and he did not kill the girls. So I do understand that, but the video is really weird. And speaking about the video, there are some speculations online, and I found two like places online. I looked for a good while. I couldn't find the length of the video, but I found at least 2 places online. I'm sure I'm leaving them somewhere on the visual assets right now. One is from a blog called evilunsolved.blogspot.com, where the author of the blog has a statement that, this person claims that the entire video is 6 minutes long. And then also we have on a forum of truecrimeguy.com, there's someone who's stating that the video was 6 minutes long. So I don't really know what to make of it. I think, to my understanding, law enforcement has not released the information on how long the actual video is. I do have to wonder what else was on that video, other than, we already have fact that girls were talking about girl stuff before they noticed a weird man. So we know that they were talking about like some girl stuff. I also want to know, and I wonder if this will ever be released, the information that is the video and the audio from the same clip, because to my understanding, this particular detail has not been released. It just has been like sort of widely accepted online that both the audio and the video comes from the same file. I'm assuming from the same video file, and it would make sense. I find it hard to believe that Liberty in that situation would manage to take like a video and then another video, or like a video and then like an audio recording. So I will sort of follow along in that rationale that both of these audio and video assets came from the same video clip. And with that, I actually want to end this week's episode, part 3 of the Delphi Murders Investigation on the JS podcast. This has been a longer episode than I initially expected. I sort of assumed that part 3 would probably be a little bit of a shorter episode in comparison to the first and second parts. It actually as now I'm looking at it, it's probably a lot longer to some degree. I'm really hoping that everyone enjoyed this week's episode, and if you did, leave a comment or something like that. Contact me with your own ideas, maybe even subscribe to my YouTube channel or to the podcast apps. Just hit follow on this podcast, or like leave a rating. That would really help me out. And yeah, pretty much, guys, I think I will probably join you next week for sure, and obviously I'm still sticking to the Delphi murders. I have some really interesting things that I want to talk about on part 4 that I couldn't talk before I set the stage for say. So all of that on the next part. So stay safe, guys, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Chill out.